Welcome to Croatia. Zagreb is the city where the third leg of the Grand Chess Tour is being currently held. We have Grandmaster Wasley playing with the black pieces here, and opposite him is going to be none other than world number 1 Magnus Carlsen. Battles between these two players have been very exciting because Wasley is one of the most solid players in the world of chess. It's very difficult to beat him, and Magnus, of course, always tries to push. And here we have both the players shaking hands. Magnus had a slow start to this tournament. He drew his first round against Ivan Šarić, and now he's playing with the white pieces against Wasley. Let's see how this game develops here. Magnus adjusts all his pieces, and this, dear friends, is the ambit recap of the day. He brings out his knight to f3 and opens a bottle of water. Wasley takes a bit of time and pushes his pawn to d5. And Magnus here thinking about what to do. He goes pawn to c4, striking in the center. Pawn goes to e6. The queen's gambit declined is on the board. And if Magnus goes d4, this setup, queen's gambit declined setup, most likely Wasley will go knight f6, bishop e7 and castles. Magnus plays g3. He delays the pawn coming to d4, and maybe he would like to go for the Catalan setup at some point. Let's see how this develops. Knight goes to f6, bishop goes to g2, bishop e7. Black is playing very simple, solid chess. White castles. And I believe black will also castle here. And now Magnus has a choice to go directly into d4, the Catalan. b3 played here, trying to defend the pawn on c4. Pawn goes to c5, striking here. And pawn takes pawn. Knight takes pawn has been taken. And let's see how Magnus plays now. Bishop, knight to c3. If you trade, pawn takes, the queens can be exchanged here. And this is very interesting to note, because let's say you take, and by the way, he goes knight c6, he doesn't take. But you take the queen. In such positions, the bishop on g2 is very powerful, while the bishop on c8 is a bit passive. He goes bishop to b2. Knight goes to c3. And pawn takes c3 has been taken. A queen comes out to c7 here. And he plays his queen to c2. A pawn to b6 played. Black wants to put his bishop on b7. The rook comes to d1. Now Wasley hasn't traded the queens. Black seems to have finished his development and equalized in the position. Bishop c1 played here. Would like to get the bishop out to f4, but rook a d8. And now the bishop comes out to f4. You cannot play e5 because of takes, bishop takes, and then you take back the knight. So that's the reason why queen c8. And Magnus now goes knight to g5, threatening a mate in one. g6 is definitely possible, but Wasley decides to take the more clarifying route here. He takes on g5, plays his pawn to f6, and he's just saying to Magnus that, look, you have the bishop pair, I understand, but I'm going to build a very strong center here with e5. And I'll then trade. Yes, he takes first on d1. Rook takes d1. Rook to d8 played. And pawn to h4 here. And he goes e5. The bishop is attacked. And bishop c1 drops back. The rook takes, queen takes here, And queen d8 played. Wow, what an interesting endgame we are going to have now. Will Magnus trade the queens? He goes queen d3. And how does Magnus even make these decisions where he's ready to trade the queens but get this pawn? Maybe it's just the fact that now the pawn structure is a bit imbalanced. You know, it's no longer symmetrical. Knight goes to d8, offering a trade of bishops. But remember, when you have the bishop pair, you don't want to trade it. f3. Even at the cost of making his bishop slightly passive, Magnus wants to bring his king in, and he knows that later he could activate his bishop from this diagonal. King f7 played. And now bishop goes to h3. The bishop is useful on this diagonal. Knight comes out to e6. And pawn to f4. He goes knight to c7. And now he takes, pawn takes, and yes, this is a weak pawn, but I think eventually you could liquidate it with e4. Magnus goes bishop b2. What's the idea with this move? Does he want to play d4 here? Wasley has 7 minutes 39 seconds. Magnus has 11 minutes 34 seconds. You can look at Magnus, how zoned in he is. And Wasley has to defend carefully now. a3 played. Little moves. Calmly trying to make some progress. b4 is coming up next. g6 played. And bishop goes out to d7. The knight comes back to d6. And pawn to c4. He's attacking the pawn here. Bishop attacks the pawn on e5. The king comes up to f6. And he goes pawn to b4 now. White is expanding here, and king e7 played, attacking the bishop. Where is Magnus going to play his bishop? He goes bishop a4, and Wasley pushes his pawn forward. But now notice that after bishop c2, which is an amazing move, when you take, bishop takes, the pawn on g6 would be hanging. So takes, bishop takes, he goes bishop e4. The bishop comes back to f1. And now bishop comes back to f5. Magnus, you will see, is not trading the bishops. And now, by the way, bishop e6 will win this pawn. So Magnus has to be careful. He goes bishop c1. Very interesting move, because when bishop e6 comes to attack here, I believe he wants to go to e3 to attack this pawn. Bishop e6 played. The material is so limited. Bishop e3 on the board. And now threatening to take and take. Bishop c4. bg2 played. Aha! Look at this. Magnus didn't even trade. a6. Bishop takes c5. Pinning the knight here. King comes up to e6. And king e3 played. The king wants to come to d4. In the center, knight f5 check, attacking g3. King f4 played. Bishop d3. Can the white king enter here? Not really, because g3 is hanging. But the bishops have started to become more and more active, and you might see the white bar rising as of now. But it's not just like now as such. What has happened is Magnus has used his bishop so beautifully that it's very difficult to pinpoint the exact moment where Wasley went wrong. Bishop e4, getting the bishop here. And now there are tactics all the time with g4 takes h5. This knight could get a bit shaky. Bishop c2 played, pushing the bishop away, threatening a check. Bishop c4, and bishop comes back to e4. They are, and now Magnus goes bishop b1. He wants to give this check, basically smoke the king out from here and get in with his own king. Bishop c4, Wasley keeps control over this, and now bishop c2. Wasley is running out of moves, so bishop had to go back, and Magnus is getting his way. 4 minutes for Magnus. King f6 played, but can there be another check here? Yes. King e7, bishop e5. The bishops are super strong. He plays his bishop to d3, and now king g5 because the g3 pawn is protected. Wow. Yes, he plays it. The knight jumps to e3, defending this way. Wasley trying his best to defend here. He's trying to overcome the force Magnus. Check. King f8, and now bishop d4. And knight jumps into c4. Slowly, look at how the white king started from g1, has gone all the way to f6, king e8. And bishop c5, again taking away some squares. Incredible play by Magnus. Like, this is just the goat of endgame. Like, I'm like, guys, get your notebooks out and start taking notes on how this guy converts such positions. It's just amazing. King d8. And now king e5, centralizing the king. Knight e4, maybe the best move to attack g3. He plays it. Wasley also trying his best to make sure that he doesn't collapse. But check. Again, Magnus so accurate. King d4. Again, finding this move. Only move bishop b1. You want to keep your knight protected. And bishop c7 defending this way. Wow. g5. Wasley like, let me trade as many pawns as I can. bd1 played to attack the pawn on h5. Takes, pawn takes, knight comes back to f6, and now bishop e2. He's keeping an eye here, keeping an eye here. Knight e8. Puts the bishop under pressure. The bishop goes back, bishop to e5, knight to d6 played. Takes, king takes. And now Magnus has finally given up his bishop pair, but this time it's because he's gaining material. He takes on a6 and he'll come back and then put pressure on the other pawn as well. Bishop g6 by Wasley. a4. Magnus knows that he's winning now. a5, covering all the squares possible. He goes bishop f5. He takes the bishop back. And you can't play bg4 because I take and my king is within the square. So bishop goes to c8. And now king e5. King to c5. And now takes the pawn on h5. Yes, you might lose the pawn on a5, but you are in time to queen your h pawn. Bishop a6 played. And he goes bishop f3 and Wasley resigns. Magnus Carlsen plays an amazing endgame here. Just the times where he did not trade the bishops, he made some uncomfortable moves, but then in the end he used and maneuvered his bishop so beautifully to dominate the knight. Truly the endgame GOAT, Magnus Carlsen. In the game, the move that was very instructive for me was when Wasley played knight d8, and here Magnus, instead of trading the bishops here, plays the move f3. It shows fine chess understanding that in spite of the fact that you close down your bishop, you are ready to make that move to preserve your bishop pair. And in doing so, you are going to bring your king up and then your bishop will find some other diagonal. It reminds me back to the time of a game that I studied as a young kid. This is a famous game between Bernstein with the white pieces and Botvinnik. In this position, Bernstein took the knight on c6, pawn takes, and played his bishop to d4. And in doing so, he was hoping that Botvinnik would take the bishop and then we would play a bishop versus knight. By the way, this position is completely fine, and in fact, the best move could very well be this way when black is doing well and would be slightly better even. But what I studied in that book and the move that Botvinnik played, which made a very deep impact on me as a little kid, was this move f6. And this looks quite ugly in the sense that you are shutting down your bishop, but you maintain the bishop pair. And as it happened in the game, later on the bishop found a new diagonal and the two bishops helped Botvinnik win the game.